Bamidbar 6:24 through 27, which is the final part, actually, of this Torah portion, which is the Birkat Kohanim, which is the priestly benediction, is what we come to call it. But we're going to take a look at some scriptures out of chapter 4 of Bamidbar first, is where actually it's where this parsha begins, and we're going to look at 21, 22, and 23 just briefly to kind of get us ready to understand that there's a lot more to the priestly benediction than, just what we just fly off and say on the few events that we actually say it. So it's been said by the rabbis that the Birkat Kohanim is more than simply a blessing. They have said that it also constitutes a prayer. And as we go through the components of this blessing, we're kind of going to get some ideas as to how we can incorporate this into our prayer life, but it'll give us an understanding of how we connect through our prayer life. And the rabbis have also said of this blessing that it's an illustration of 3 levels that we climb in order to come into the presence of Yahweh Elohim. And I found that particular analogy interesting because we've said that there were 3 levels in the Ark of Noah. And we've studied the Ark together, and we've seen that the Ark, according to Rashi, meant something that brings us protection, that encloses us and protects us. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, that it actually is also something that means the word itself. So we find that within the ark there were also 3 levels, that at the top level of the ark, when you reached the top level, you came to the window that allowed the light in. And we said that these levels represented knowledge. At the lower level, we come to a knowledge. And then at the second level, that knowledge becomes wisdom. And then finally, when we reach the 3rd level, right before the light, we have understanding. And when we have understanding is when we can actually express the knowledge and the wisdom that we have to the world around us. So in this study, we're going to consider the idea of this blessing as a prayer, as well as considering these 3 levels of growth found within its word. The parsha itself begins at Bamidbar 4:21, and it is here that we're going to begin our study, as it's here that we find the bottom level, as well as the indicator of how we grow. Now, like I said, the parsha is naso, and naso literally means to ascend. So let's consider these first 3 verses of the parsha. Let's go to our Elohim and get his help, and then we'll start taking a look at our study. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and our hearts, so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word and your spirit has to tell us. And we thank you for it all. In the name of Yeshua, amen. So this parsha begins Bamidbar 4, and this is verse 21. Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, Take the son of the sons of Gershon, also by their fathers' houses, by their families, from 30 years old and upward until 50 years old shall you number them. All that enter in to wait upon the service and to do the service of the tent of meeting. The first consideration that we're going to explore is the first word in verse 21, which is Vaidabar, which means and spoke. The root of Vaidabar is deber, which means not just to speak, but it also means to declare, to command, and to promise. Also, beyond the scope of this particular study, debar also means to curse and to blaspheme. But within the scope of this study, we're looking at 3 particular meanings that in blessing us, we receive a declaration, a command, and a promise. If we consider that this comes from Yahuwah, then we have to declare that this declaration, command, and promise is to affect every aspect of our lives. as the very name of Yahuwah, which we've talked about in the past, represents everything that there is, everything that there was, everything that there will be. It means today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And it also, the word Yahuwah, from the same root as these other things, means, which is Yahi, means to exist. So everything in our existence is dependent on the declaration, command, and the promise that comes forth from Yahuwah. This must be our level of commitment to our Elohim as well, and that in doing so we fulfill verse 22. Verse 22 says, take the sum of the sons of Gershon also by their fathers' houses and by their families. So we say, well, okay, what does that mean, and how does that show fulfillment of this? The word naso, as we have seen, means to ascend. This is being spoken to the sons of Gershon, but more specifically to the sum of them. The word used for sum in this verse is rosh, which means head. The word for sons is beneh, from the root bana, meaning to establish. We'll see here as we get into the study that bana not only means to establish, but it also means to restore and to renew. So the name Gershon means exile. Comes from the root garash, that means to drive out, as well as to trouble. So an idea that we can compile here is to look at ourselves in the absence of our Elohim. To look at ourselves from the point of view of Bereshit 1 verse 2. It says, and the earth was what? It was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. This is our condition without Elohim in our life. Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. That means that we are still surrounded by the undeserved favor of Yahuwah Elohim, His grace. But it wasn't until verse 3 of Bereshit 1 where he says, and Elohim said, let there be light, that things change for us. So we see that in this state we are, this declaration, command, and promise is being spoken to one who is spiritually established in exile. In other words, someone who is in a state of spiritual poverty. He's empty, he's void, or she is empty and void. Driven away from Yahuwah Elohim by trouble. We've talked about the tower over our last 2 or 3 Torah Tuesdays. Building the tower. Allowing ourselves to become Elohim in our lives. And by doing that, we alienate ourselves from Elohim, and what happens? We find ourselves in trouble, and that trouble brings on those things that come from the city being under siege, so to speak, that we fall into anxiety or depression, or we worry, or we wig out or freak out or about stuff. So we have said that there are times when we are the Tav. When we find ourselves from the farthest point from the Aleph. Those of you that are new here tonight, the Tav is the last letter of the Aleph faith. Is the furthest point from the Aleph. When we say Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph faith. Aleph, the first time we find Aleph as the root of a word in Torah, is in Bereshit 1:1, which is in the word Elohim. So Aleph is a representation of Elohim. The compositional gematria of the Aleph, when I say compositional gematria, all Hebrew letters with the exception of Yod are composed of other Hebrew letters. And when you take a look at the Aleph, it's composed of 2 Yods with a value of 10 apiece, and a Vav with a value of 6, which gives us 26, which is the same gematria as the name of Yahuwah. So the Aleph is a representation of Yahuwah Elohim. But when we're at the Tav, where are we? We're at the farthest point. This is, the Tav was the vehicle of sacrifice that was necessary for Yeshua to come. But Tav also means the covenant marker. So we find ourselves at the farthest point from Elohim. When we cry out, why have you forsaken me? All of a sudden, everything that we've gotten ourselves into is always Elohim's fault. Why have you forsaken me? Why haven't you jump through all the hoops that I expect you to jump through to make everything that I want to happen. It's because I'm building that tower, I'm not paying attention as to what components I need to make a tower. So in this, we also have to consider another meaning of the word bana, which means to restore. So we can consider that this declaration, command, and promise is being spoken forth to every aspect of our lives from the only one who can restore and redeem every aspect of our lives, who is Yahuwah our Elohim, to deliver us from this feeling or state of exile and back into a relationship with Him. And the stages of this are revealed in this phrase, from 30 years old and upwards until 50. You say, well, how do we see anything in from 30 years old and upwards until 50? In from 30, we can say that it begins with 30, or that it is a product of 30. Either idea shows us the effect of lamed. Lamed is the 12th letter of the alphabet, but has a numerical value of 30. The word lamed in Hebrew means to instruct, it means to teach, it means to learn. So what we see here is that the first level of the ark is to come to a knowledge. If we ask what is produced by 30 or by lamed, then we can say that it is wisdom and ultimately understanding that are produced from it. These are the second and third levels of the ark. When we reach or ascend 50, the numerical value of nun is 50. Nun represents life. The first time that we see nun as the root of the word in Torah is in the word nefeshim, which means life. It's also the root of the nefesh, which is the soul. So when we reach or ascend to 50, a restoration and renewal of our very life and soul takes place. We enter into the ark. We learn. We come to a knowledge. We gain the wisdom. We gain the understanding. We are in the presence of the window that was right above the third level, 1 cubit below the top. And the light comes in. We are in the presence of our Elohim. So everything about our life is a learning experience to move us forward and ascend, naso, into the presence of our Elohim, and to have a relationship with our Elohim. This is what the whole of Torah and Brit Hadashah is about. It's not to worry about pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib or rapture this or rapture that or prophetic this or prophetic that or end times this or end times that or the mystery of the Shemitah. It's all about building a relationship with our Elohim. So, considering all of this, we can consider that what was spoken in this parsha, which includes the testing of a wife accused in adultery, the service of the Levites, and the Nazir. The Nazir is the Nazarite vows. These are all concepts which will help us travel from the furthest point from the Aleph, which is the Tav, to being in the presence of the Aleph. So with this introduction having been given, we can now consider the Birkat Kohanim. And it begins in Bamidbar 6, verse 22. It says, and Yahuwah spoke unto Moses, saying, we look at stuff like this, it's okay, well, it's just an introduction. This is what Yahuwah was about to say to Moses. But we don't consider that the components within such a simple verse mean so much to us. The key word of this verse is, again, davar, which means not only to speak, but it also means a command, a promise, a declaration. It is from Yahuwah. Yahuwah, again, means existence, today, yesterday, and tomorrow, in all there is, all there was, and all there will be. This word is given to the whole of our being. When Elohim speaks to us, He speaks to us both as a physical being, but also as a spiritual being, everything that we are. The last word of this verse is le'omer, from the root amar, that does mean say, but it also means something spoken from the heart. So the declaration, command, and promise is drawn. Moses means to draw forth from the heart of Yahuwah Elohim, which is Torah. We said that in Torah, the first 5 books, the last word in Torah in Israel ends with the Lamed. The first word in Torah, which is Bereshit 1:1, is Bereshit, begins with the Beit. If we put the Lamed and the Beit together, it spells Lev. It's a Hebrew word that means heart. And again, if we look at the very center letter of Torah, at Vayikra 11:42, we find in the middle of the word Gachon for belly, we find the Vav, the enlarged Vav. And the Vav has a numerical value of 6. It's a representation of humankind, that we are at the very center of the heart of Yahuwah Elohim, that we are his prime concern, his first love, and that we have a responsibility to make him our first love. So it is in this, in Torah, that we receive the instruction that leads us out of exile and back into the presence of our Elohim. It is here that we receive our rest, our nourishment, and our protection. It is here that we are restored, redeemed, and delivered from our self-destructiveness. In Yochanan and John, chapter 1:1, John tells us something about the Word. It says, in the beginning was the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. The same was in the beginning with Elohim. All things were made by him, and without him was nothing, or was anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And then we go down to Yochanan, or John 1:14, and it says, and the Word was made flesh, and from the Aramaic it says, and made his tabernacle among us. And we beheld his glory. The glory is the only begotten of the Father, full of grace, undeserved favor, and truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So we have an understanding of something much bigger that's in our relationship. So we find our restoration, redemption, and deliverance in the word of Yahuwah Elohim, who is Yeshua. And Yeshua said to us, now we just talked about Lev, we just talked about Torah, we just talked about the word, the letters that spell out heart. We just talked about the Vav that's in the middle of Torah that represents us. So listen to what Yeshua says at Matthew 11:28-29. This is from the Aramaic again. Come unto me, all of you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek, and you shall find rest in my heart to your souls. So we're seeing something other than the fact that we are within the very center of the heart of Elohim if we believe and receive. But when he says, take my yoke upon you, that brings us to another letter. We said that there was 8 people that went into the ark. We say 8 is the numerical value of the letter Het. All letters are composed of other letters. In this case, the Het is composed of the Zion, which means weapon. The root of Zion is Zan, which means nourishment. It's the 7th letter. We see the 7th day is our rest. The Zion is called the crown Vav, which represents Yeshua, represents the rest, protection, and nourishment that comes through the Word. And that it's yoked to the letter Vav, a representation of you and I. So when we understand this, that if we will yoke ourselves to the Word, we come into the presence of Elohim and we receive rest, we receive protection, we receive nourishment. And ultimately, it comes with restoration, redemption, and deliverance. It's hard to say salvation because there's really not a word for salvation in Hebrew, and it's not really a concept that exists. Elohim delivers us. He pulls us out, but he places us here to where we still have to make a decision whether to stay in exile or to find our way back into His presence. So, we see here that this blessing or prayer that is to follow